I'll give you my dog. If you arrest my stepfather, is the little boy's words, left the officer stunned. The snow fell heavy on Summit Creek, Montana. That night, thick flakes blurring the highway into a ghostly ribbon of white. Deputy Mason Blake gripped the wheel of his patrol SUV, the heater fighting a losing battle against the cold. He had served in deserts halfway around the world, but nothing chilled him like a Montana winter. The town lay quiet, wrapped in silence, until he saw movement ahead. At first, he thought it was just the storm playing tricks. Then the headlights carved through the snow and revealed a boy, small, barely 10 years old, walking alone in the blizzard, head bowed, boots too large for his feet. One hand clutched a leash, and at the end of it patted a German shepherd, its dark coat rimed with frost, its body pressed close to the boy's leg as if shielding him from the storm. Mason slowed, heart pounding. He rolled down his window, snow whipping in. "Hey, kid, what are you doing out here?" The boy stopped. Slowly, he lifted his face towards the light. Pale cheeks, lips cracked from the cold, eyes wide and hollow with something far older than his years. His voice trembled, barely audible over the wind. "I'll give you my dog," he whispered, "if you arrest my stepfather." Mason blinked, stunned. He'd been on the force long enough to hear desperate bargains, pleas from addicts, lies from drunks, threats from criminals, but never this. Never a child offering away his only protector in exchange for safety. The dog pressed closer, amber eyes locked on Mason, not snarling, not fearful, just watchful, as though it understood every word. Snow swirled between them, the storm howling like a beast. Mason felt something deep in his chest twist. Whoever this boy was, whatever story he carried, it was darker than the winter night, and it was about to pull Mason into a fight that would test everything he thought he knew about loyalty, justice, and the fragile courage of a child who had already lost too much. The heater roared inside the patrol car as Mason Blake pulled the boy and his dog out of the storm. Snow slid off their coats in clumps, pooling on the rubber mats, but neither seemed to notice. The boy sat stiff in the passenger seat, his small hands clasped tightly in his lap. The dog, muscular but lean, with a faint scar above one eye, pressed its weight against the boy's legs, watching Mason with unblinking eyes. Mason kept his voice steady, gentle. "Name's Deputy Blake. What's yours?" The boy hesitated, then whispered, "Eli Parker." "And this guy?" Mason nodded at the shepherd. "Valor," Eli said softly. His fingers found the dog's collar, gripping it like a lifeline. The car rumbled down the empty road, headlights slicing through sheets of snow. Mason studied the boy from the corner of his eye, 9, maybe 10 years old. Clothes thin, face hollow. There was a stillness about him that Mason recognized, not the stillness of calm, but of someone who had learned not to be noticed. Mason had seen it overseas in refugee camps. He had seen it in battered women's shelters, and now he saw it in Summit Creek, Montana, sitting in his passenger seat with a German shepherd keeping guard. Mason was 34, a Marine veteran who had served 2 tours before coming home. Combat had carved hard edges into him, but it had also sharpened his sense of what could not be ignored. He had joined the sheriff's department because he believed in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. And right now, nothing in the world mattered more than this boy's trembling whisper, "Arrest my stepfather." At the station, warmth and fluorescent light replaced the storm's fury. Rachel Torres, the county's new social worker, met them at the door. She was young, sharp-eyed, her dark hair pulled back tight, but her face softened when she saw Eli. She crouched, keeping her voice low. "Hi there, Eli. You're safe now." But Eli didn't answer. He stayed pressed against Valor, whose body blocked Rachel like a wall. Mason lifted a hand. "Give him time. He trusts the dog. Let's start there." They moved into an interview room. Eli finally spoke in fragments, voice trembling, gaze fixed on the floor. His stepfather, Victor Kane, had been hurting him for months, hurting his mother too until she died last winter. The boy's voice cracked when he said it, but he didn't cry. Mason had seen that kind of grief before, the kind too deep for tears. And then came the darker truth. Rachel asked softly, "Eli, why did you want us to arrest Victor?" Eli's hands twisted the leash. "Because he takes kids, not just me. I hear them crying in the house, and sometimes he goes away in trucks and comes back with money. He says if I ever tell, Valor won't be there in the morning." His eyes lifted for the first time, wide and raw. "So I thought, maybe if I gave you Valor, you'd help me." Silence filled the room. Mason felt his stomach drop. This wasn't just domestic abuse. This was something wider, darker, and it was coming from a man whose name he already knew too well. Victor Kane had surfaced in files before suspected in small-time meth distribution, tied loosely to missing persons in neighboring counties. Nothing ever stuck. He was slippery, violent, and dangerous. And now Mason realized he was terrorizing his own stepson. Rachel exhaled sharply, scribbling notes. His name showed up in 3 Helena cases, missing kids, no convictions, no evidence strong enough to hold. She glanced at Mason, her voice grim. "But this? If Eli's right, it's bigger than we thought." Valor shifted, pressing closer to Eli. Mason studied the dog's broad chest, sharp eyes, movements disciplined. This was no backyard pet. "Where'd Valor come from?" he asked. Eli's small hand tightened on the collar. "He was my dad's, before he disappeared." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Mom said Dad never left us. That Valor was proof he'd come back." Mason felt the hair on his neck rise. John Parker, Eli's father, reported missing 2 years ago after a trucking accident that never quite added up. Mason remembered the case file open, unsolved, a man swallowed by silence. Now the boy sat before him, offering the one thing he loved most in exchange for justice. And Mason knew the truth. Eli didn't want to give up Valor. He wanted someone to see him, someone to believe him, someone to fight for him. Mason leaned forward, voice low but steady. "Listen to me, Eli. You don't have to trade Valor. You don't have to give away the only thing you've got. Because I promise you, your stepfather will answer for what he's done." Eli blinked up at him, searching for cracks in his words. Valor's ears twitched, eyes locked on Mason, and in that moment, the deputy and the shepherd seemed to come to the same conclusion. The boy wasn't alone anymore. The safe house was nothing more than a cabin tucked deep into the pines on the edge of Summit Creek. It had once belonged to the Forest Service, its walls lined with old maps, and the faint smell of cedar smoke lingering in the rafters. For now, it was where Mason brought Eli and Valor away from town, away from Victor Kane's reach. Eli sat curled on the couch, knees hugged to his chest. His eyes darted to every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the shutters. Valor pressed against him like a shadow, head resting on the boy's lap, ears flicking at each sound. The dog didn't relax until Mason came back into the room, carrying mugs of cocoa. "Here," Mason said, setting one on the table. "Warms you up faster than coffee." Eli hesitated, then reached for the mug with both hands. Steam fogged his glasses, too large for his face, and he sniffed the drink before taking a cautious sip. His shoulders eased a fraction. Valor licked the boy's wrist as if reminding him it was safe. Mason leaned back in a chair opposite them, watching. He'd been trained to read people suspects, witnesses, soldiers under stress. Eli was no different, except that his silence carried more weight than most adults he'd met. He didn't fidget without purpose. He didn't speak unless necessary. It was as though the boy had learned that every word, every movement, could trigger danger. "Eli," Mason said quietly, "I need you to know something. Valor isn't just your dog. He's your partner. And now, he's mine too. We're all in this together." The boy looked up sharply. "But I said you could have him if—" Mason shook his head. "I don't need to take him. You keep Valor. I just need both of you to trust me. Can you do that?" Eli's small hand slid into Valor's fur, gripping tight. The dog's tail thumped once against the couch. Finally, Eli gave a faint nod. That night, Mason saw the first signs of bond forming. Eli fell asleep against Valor's side. The dog curled protectively around him, but when nightmares jerked the boy awake, Mason was there too. He crouched by the couch, speaking low and steady, his presence anchoring both child and animal. By morning, the safe house felt less like a hiding place and more like a fragile home. Eli followed Mason into the kitchen, helping stir pancake batter with clumsy hands. Valor stationed himself at the doorway, head high, watching like a sentry. When Eli dropped a spoon and flinched at the clatter, Mason crouched beside him, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "It's okay. You're safe here." Slowly, the boy's breathing steadied. Valor nosed his elbow, and Eli managed a small, tentative smile, the first Mason had seen. It was Rachel who joined them later, bringing case files and a laptop. She spread photographs on the table, trucks, license plates, aerial shots of the cabin north of town. Eli stiffened at the images, pointing with a trembling finger. "That's it. That's where he takes the others." Mason's jaw tightened. Rachel shot him a look they both knew the gravity, but Eli's willingness to speak, here in the safety of the cabin with Valor pressed against him, was proof of something vital. Trust was taking root. That evening, as the storm howled outside, Mason sat by the fire with a notepad. Eli dozed against Valor again, one hand buried in the shepherd's thick fur. Mason watched them, something fierce stirring in his chest. He had carried soldiers out of battlefields, buried brothers, and faced death with cold resolve. But this boy was different. He wasn't a mission. He wasn't a file. He was a life depending on him, and Mason knew he couldn't fail him. Not now, not ever. The fire burned low in the cabin, casting shifting shadows on the log walls. Mason sat at the table with Rachel's files spread before him, while Eli slept curled against Valor on the couch. Outside, the storm had quieted to a soft whisper of snow. The silence pressed on him, dredging up memories he had long tried to bury. Mason Blake had been a Marine for 12 years, 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. He had been good at it, too good, some said. He could read terrain, track patterns, predict ambushes, but he couldn't predict the one moment that mattered most. His unit had been escorting a convoy through a narrow valley when the IED detonated. Flames, chaos, screams. Mason pulled 3 men out, but the 4th Sergeant Decker, his closest friend, was gone before he reached him. The image of the body half buried in dust never left his mind. Guilt clung to him like smoke. He came home with medals, but they felt like mockery. His marriage unraveled, his nights drowned in silence. Joining the sheriff's office in Summit Creek had been less about purpose and more about survival. Keep moving, keep serving, keep the ghosts at bay. Now, watching Eli twitch in restless dreams, Mason saw the same shadows he carried. He recognized the look of someone who had lost too much too soon. Rachel returned from the kitchen with 2 mugs of coffee. She spoke in a whisper. "You see it too, don't you? He's holding it all in. Kids like that, they don't break down. They harden." Mason nodded, rubbing his temples. "The stepfather, Cain, I've crossed his name before small-time meth. Suspicious freight runs, always slips away. But Eli's testimony, it ties him to something bigger." Rachel's eyes flicked to the couch. "And Valor? That dog's not just a pet. Look at the way he watches Eli. That's more than companionship. That's training, discipline, like he knows he's the last wall standing." Mason studied the shepherd, the scar above one eye, the way his ears twitched at every sound. Valor wasn't just born loyal, he'd been forged by someone, and Mason knew who. Later, when Eli stirred awake, Mason sat with him by the fire. The boy's voice was soft, halting. "My mom, she used to say Valor was Dad's gift, before Dad left." "Left?" Mason asked gently. Eli shook his head. "He didn't leave. Victor said he did, but I know that's not true. One night, Dad went to work and never came back. Victor moved in after. Mom cried a lot. Then she stopped, and then she was gone." His throat tightened, but he pressed on. "Victor said it was her own fault, but I saw him hit her. And after she died, he said if I told anyone, Valor would disappear too." The boy buried his face into Valor's fur. The dog nudged him, steady and solid. Mason swallowed hard. John Parker, the missing trucker, Eli's father. Mason remembered the case, a few lines in a file that never closed. Now it wasn't just a cold trail. It was alive, breathing in the fear of a child. "You know," Mason said carefully, "sometimes people aren't gone the way we think. Sometimes they're still out there, waiting to be found." Eli's eyes lifted, a flicker of hope trembling in them. "You think Dad's alive?" Mason hesitated. He wanted to promise, but promises had betrayed him before. "I think we'll find out the truth," he said finally. That night, after Eli drifted back to sleep, Mason's mind returned to Valor. If the dog had been John Parker's, then he was more than a pet. He was a thread tying father to son, past to present. Perhaps even a clue. The way Valor reacted to Cain's name, the way he bristled when trucks were mentioned, it wasn't coincidence. Dogs remembered. Dogs knew. Mason leaned against the window, watching snow swirl beneath the moonlight. He thought of Decker, of the men he couldn't save. Then he thought of Eli, of John Parker, of Valor guarding the boy like a soldier holding the line. And he knew this wasn't just another case. This was a second chance, a chance to fight for someone who still had time to be saved. Rachel's voice broke into his thoughts. "You've carried ghosts a long time, haven't you?" Mason didn't answer. He just kept staring into the dark, where the forest pressed against the glass. Rachel softened. "Well, maybe this time you get to bring someone home." Mason turned to look at Eli, curled against Valor, the dog's chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. For the first time in years, he felt the possibility that she might be right. The storm had thinned to a light flurry by the time dawn crept over Summit Creek. At the safe house, Mason cooked bacon on a cast-iron skillet, the smell drifting through the cabin. Eli sat at the table, Valor at his side, both watching with quiet anticipation. For a moment, it almost looked like a family breakfast, the kind Mason had never managed to hold on to. But peace was fragile. Rachel arrived with news that shattered it. She set her laptop on the table, her expression grim. "We got chatter from Helena. Victor Kane knows Eli's gone, and he's looking. He's not working alone either. His name connects to at least 2 interstate trafficking cases. This isn't just abuse, it's organized crime." Eli's fork froze halfway to his mouth. His face paled. Valor stiffened, ears twitching toward the door. Mason crouched beside the boy. "You're safe here. We've got deputies on the roads, and Kane doesn't know this cabin." But even as he said it, unease crawled through him. He had fought men like Kane before, men who thrived in shadows, who could sniff out weakness like wolves. And Kane's weakness was gone now, replaced by fury. That night, the attack came. It started with Valor. The shepherd snapped awake from a doze, barking sharp and low. His body stiffened, his gaze locked on the dark tree line beyond the frosted window. Mason reached for his rifle just as headlights flared through the pines. A truck barreled down the old logging road, tires skidding on ice. Before Mason could react, the front door buckled under a heavy kick. Figures stormed inside, 3 men, faces masked, weapons drawn. The smell of gasoline hit the air. "Get the kid!" one barked. Eli screamed, clutching Valor's collar. The dog lunged, teeth bared, colliding with the first intruder and knocking him back against the wall. Mason fired, the gunshot deafening in the small cabin, dropping the second man. Rachel pulled Eli toward the back, shouting, "Go! Go!" But the third man, broad-shouldered and quick, caught Eli's arm. Valor whirled, jaws clamping onto the man's wrist with bone-crushing force. He howled, dropping the boy, but in the chaos, a lantern was knocked over. Flames leapt hungrily across the wooden floor. "Out!" Mason roared. Smoke billowed as the intruders retreated into the night, dragging their injured comrade. Their truck fishtailed down the road, vanishing into the trees. Inside, the cabin was turning into an inferno. Rachel shoved open a rear door, pulling Eli through the snow. Mason coughed through the smoke, Valor at his side, teeth still streaked with blood. Together, they stumbled into the icy air as the safe house collapsed in flames behind them. Eli sobbed into Valor's fur, the dog pressing against him, refusing to let go. Mason dropped to one knee, steadying them both. His chest heaved, adrenaline coursing through him. Rachel's voice was raw. "They knew exactly where to find us. Someone tipped Kane off." Mason's jaw clenched. Betrayal, he could smell it. Either someone in law enforcement was compromised, or Kane's reach was longer than they feared. Either way, there would be no more hiding. Eli lifted his tear-streaked face, his voice barely audible. "He won't stop, will he?" Mason pulled him close, his tone fierce. "No, but neither will we." Valor barked once, sharp and certain, as though sealing the vow. That night, huddled in a borrowed squad car while deputies secured what was left of the safe house, Mason looked at the boy and the dog pressed against each other. Something shifted inside him. This wasn't just protection anymore, this was war. Victor Kane had thrown the first real strike. Mason would make sure it was his last. The night of the raid came heavy with snow, muffling the forest in a strange, expectant silence. Mason adjusted the strap of his rifle as he crouched with the task force outside the cabin north of town, the one Eli had described, where trucks came and went at odd hours. Eli and Valor had been moved to another safe location with Rachel, but Mason carried their weight in his chest like a fire. This was where Victor Kane kept his secrets. This was where the boys' nightmare began. "Go!" Mason ordered. The team surged forward, boots crunching on ice, rifles raised. The front door splintered under a battering ram. Gunfire erupted from inside sharp, panicked bursts. Mason dove through smoke, his shoulder colliding with a gunman's ribs. He swung his weapon, fired twice. The man crumpled. Through the chaos, Mason caught a glimpse of Kane himself. Broad frame, face twisted in a sneer, dragging someone down a hallway. Mason's pulse spiked. It wasn't just another victim. Mason knew that face from photos. John Parker, Eli's father. "Cover me!" Mason shouted, sprinting after them. Bullets cracked past him, splintering door frames. He hit the hallway, firing at Kane's enforcers, then shoved through a locked door with brute force. Inside, John Parker was chained to a post, gaunt and pale, but alive. Kane swung a pistol toward Mason, his eyes cold. "You should have stayed out of this, soldier." Mason fired. The bullet grazed Kane's shoulder, sending him staggering back. The two men collided, grappling in the flickering light of a bare bulb. Kane was strong, fueled by rage, but Mason fought with something harder: memory of Decker, memory of Eli's wide eyes, memory of a boy offering his only friend in exchange for justice. The fight crashed into the corridor. Kane slammed Mason against the wall, his gun skittering across the floor. He drew a knife, blade flashing. Mason caught his wrist, straining, the knife's edge trembling inches from his throat. Then came the sound, a growl low, primal and furious. Valor. The shepherd had slipped free from the safe location, following the scent of his boy's fear. He lunged down the hall, teeth sinking into Kane's arm. The knife clattered to the floor. Kane roared, trying to shake the dog off, but Valor held fast, his body a wall of muscle and fury. Mason wrenched free, driving his fist into Kane's jaw. The man collapsed, pinned beneath Valor's weight. The shepherd snarled until Mason's voice cut through. "Valor, enough!" The dog released, standing guard with teeth bared, eyes blazing. Kane writhed on the floor, bleeding, defeated. Mason dropped to John Parker's side, ripping chains loose. The man sagged into his arms, whispering hoarsely, "My boy, is Eli safe?" Mason gripped his shoulder. "He's safe, and he's waiting for you." Outside, sirens wailed as federal agents poured in, cuffing Kane and hauling his men out into the snow. The cabin reeked of gunpowder and sweat, but in Mason's chest, something finally eased. The storm wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Later, when Eli was brought in, the reunion tore through the air like sunlight breaking storm clouds. The boy ran to his father, Valor bounding beside him, barking with joy. John Parker dropped to his knees, gathering them both into trembling arms. For the first time in years, he wasn't a prisoner. He was a father again. Mason stood back, throat tight, Rachel beside him. She whispered, "You did it." But Mason shook his head. His eyes stayed on Eli and Valor, pressed together like boy and shadow. "No," he said quietly. "They did." Spring crept into Summit Creek slowly, melting the last of winter's scars. Where the safe house once stood, blackened timbers had been cleared, and fresh earth promised new beginnings. For Eli Parker, life had shifted from survival to something he had never dared imagine: peace. John Parker walked out of the hospital, gaunt but alive, his arm always resting on his son's shoulder, as if afraid to lose him again. Every morning, Eli woke in their new home, a modest house on a quiet street, and Valor sprawled across the foot of his bed. No more listening for footsteps in the dark. No more holding back tears out of fear. Just warmth, safety, and the sound of his father's voice humming while making breakfast. Rachel Torres helped establish the Grace Parker Foundation, named after Eli's late mother. Its mission was simple but fierce: to protect children who had no one else. The town rallied behind it, donating, volunteering, ensuring no child in Summit Creek would fall through the cracks again. Rachel became its director, her quiet determination giving the foundation a heartbeat. As for Mason Blake, he tried to stand at the edge of it all, but the community wouldn't allow it. At the courthouse steps, the sheriff pinned a medal to his chest, calling him the man who brought Summit Creek back its children. Mason accepted quietly, eyes flicking instead to where Eli sat with Valor in his lap, smiling in a way he never had before. That was the only recognition he needed. Valor was honored too. The county commissioned a special badge for him, Summit Creek Sheriff's K9 Valor. When the leather strap was fastened to his collar, the shepherd barked once, sharp and proud, as if he understood the weight of it. Eli beamed, whispering, "See, Dad, he's a real hero now." John ruffled his son's hair, his voice thick with emotion. He always was. On the first warm evening of the year, Mason visited their home. He found Eli tossing a ball in the yard, Valor leaping with joy. John leaned against the porch rail, contentment etched into his tired features. For a long moment, Mason simply watched, because this was what justice was supposed to look like. Not just arrests and convictions, but families restored, laughter returned, futures rebuilt. Not every scar would fade. But in Summit Creek, one boy had found his father again, one dog had found his true place, and one community had proven that even in the coldest winters, courage and love could light the way forward. Because heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they walk on four legs, keeping watch over the ones who need them most.